A millionaire followed a little beggar girl who'd stolen from him on the street. But when he saw what she intended to do, he broke down in tears. On a bustling city street, the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, yet Lucas Warburton strode along as if it had no power over him. His designer suit and high-end watch were unmistakable emblems of the empire he'd built, often by crushing anyone foolish enough to challenge him. At 45, his prematurely silver hair and eyes as cold as onyx commanded an aura of respect and fear wherever he went. He was about to make a call when a slight jostle interrupted him. At first, he paid no mind. The sidewalk was crowded. But a moment later, when he reached into his suit pocket, his expression darkened. His wallet was gone. Spinning on his heel like a coiled snake ready to strike, his gaze locked onto a small figure slipping away. "Stop right there, you thief!" he roared, his voice booming down the street and drawing the attention of passers-by. "You don't know who you're messing with." The girl, quick as a frightened cat, bolted deeper into the crowd, darting skillfully around people. A kid, he thought, his anger surging as he realized it. A child had dared to steal from him. His wounded pride quickly turned into a simmering rage, his hands shaking with the intensity. Adjusting his silk tie, with a smirk that hinted at something far darker, he decided the police weren't necessary. No, that would be too easy. "Get back here, you little rat," he bellowed, launching into a chase. People quickly stepped aside as they saw the towering, enraged man charging forward. Vendors scrambled out of the way as the girl dodged their stalls, sending items tumbling in her wake. Lucas trampled over the fallen merchandise without a second glance, his eyes locked on her. "Run while you can," he muttered under his breath, voice low and dangerous. "The farther you go, the harsher your lesson will be." The businessman pressed on, each step steady and powerful, his breath controlled by years of boxing at his exclusive club, and his resolve unwavering. Each time the girl glanced over her shoulder, he saw the rising panic in her wide, dark eyes. "Don't bother trying to run," he taunted, relishing the fear that twisted her face. "I could chase you all day, you little street rat." The chase took them through ever-narrowing alleyways, thick with the scent of food and the bustling noise of people, elements Lucas found utterly revolting. The girl kicked over boxes and trash cans to slow him down, but he vaulted over them with the ease of a predator. "Pathetic," he sneered to himself. "Your little tricks are only stalling the inevitable." His finely woven shirt was already soaked with sweat, but he didn't let up. He saw her movements grow sluggish, the fatigue setting in. "Getting tired?" he called out, his voice bouncing off the narrow walls. "You won't make it much longer, you little thief." The deeper they went, the darker the streets became, far from the bustling avenue. He could sense his trap closing in on her with every turn. Soon, he thought, she'd run out of options. "The rat's almost caught," he mused, feeling satisfaction as she hesitated at a fork. Her fear was palpable, her quick, graceful strides now faltering. Keeping a steady pace, Lucas savored the terror he'd stirred up. "Look at her," he thought with a cruel grin, watching her shiver like a cornered animal. Nobody steals from Lucas Warburton and gets away with it. As they moved farther from the light, he watched her dash into a shadowed alley, desperation overtaking her. Her fraying sandals slapped against the pavement in a frantic rhythm. Typical and stupid, he thought, pausing at the entrance. "Now there's nowhere left to run, little rat." He calmly adjusted his cuffs, eyeing the dark passageway where she had fled. His steely eyes glinted with twisted satisfaction. "Let's see how long you'll last in the shadows," he murmured menacingly. "After today, you'll regret ever crossing paths with me." Lucas entered the alley with slow, deliberate steps, allowing the echo of his Italian shoes to signal his approach. Dim light filtered through the narrow gaps between buildings, casting long shadows, but he had no trouble adjusting to the darkness. The stench of garbage and damp didn't faze him in the slightest. It was all just part of his twisted game for payback. "I can hear you breathing, you little thief." His voice cut through the stillness like a blade. "Your heart must be pounding as loud as those coins you snatched from me." The rustling of bills and the clinking of coins caught his ear. Moving closer, Lucas spotted the girl, crouched behind a rusted trash bin. She was nervously counting the stolen money, her dirt-streaked fingers fumbling over the cash. "What a scene," he sneered with a malicious grin. "Counting your stolen loot like a rat with its crumbs." Jenny froze at the sound of his voice, clutching the crumpled bills in her thin, trembling hands. Sweat trickled down her grimy face, mingling with the grime of the alley. Her terrified eyes locked on the towering figure blocking her way out. "Please, sir," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean to." "I just needed." Lucas laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off the alley walls. He moved forward, watching her shrink even further back. A faint light spilled in from the street, casting shadows on his face and emphasizing his scornful look. "Do you even know how much this suit costs? The one you dared to touch with those dirty hands," he taunted, straightening his cuffs. "More than you could steal in a whole year." Jenny made a frantic attempt to dart past him, her scrawny legs pushing her forward like a panicked deer. But the cracked pavement had other plans. "No, no!" she cried as her foot snagged in a hole. "Please, no!" She hit the ground hard, a cry of pain escaping her dry lips. Her knees scraped against the rough asphalt, tearing her worn clothes and the skin underneath. Blood stained the torn fabric, but the terror she felt outweighed the sting. "Get up, get up!" her mind screamed in panic. "You have to run." Lucas watched, savoring the moment, his steps slow and measured, like a cat toying with its prey, savoring every second before the final strike. Jenny's quiet sobs were like a twisted melody to his ears. "How disappointing," he sneered, pausing just a few feet from her. "I thought street rats were supposed to be quicker." She tried to crawl away, but pain flared in her knee, sharp and relentless. Blood trickled down, pooling into small dark spots on the grimy pavement. Her hands trembled uncontrollably as she struggled to lift herself. "Please, sir," she begged, thick tears cutting streaks down her dirt-smeared face. "I can explain." The sleek leather wallet had slipped from her grasp in her fall, scattering cash and cards across the dirty alley. Lucas stooped to pick up his belongings, his gaze never leaving the terrified figure crouched before him. "Explain?" he asked, feigning interest. "Explain how you thought you could get away with stealing from me, Lucas Warburton. Go on. This should be good." The distant wail of sirens made Jenny shrink even further. Her sobs filled the empty space around them, blending with the sounds of the city just beyond. Her injured knee throbbed, but it was the fear pounding in her chest that consumed her. "Please don't turn me in," she whispered desperately, her voice cracking. "My mama, she's dying." Lucas paused, raising a brow in a mix of surprise and doubt. He watched her tears flow, leaving wet streaks on her grimy cheeks. "A sob story to sway the bad guy," he mocked, his tone soaked in sarcasm. "You really think that's going to work? That I'd actually believe that?" Gathering what little strength she had left, Jenny forced herself to meet his icy gaze, her hands clenched, knuckles white. Her voice shook, each word broken by sobs. "It's not a lie," she stammered. "Please, she needs medicine." Lucas adjusted his silk tie, a habit revealing his discomfort with the strange turn of events. Her cries reverberated in the alley, chipping away at his steely exterior. "And why would I believe you?" he demanded, his voice still cold but with a faint, barely noticeable waver. "Why not rob a pharmacy then?" The sirens grew louder, making Jenny's panic spike. Blood from her knee stained the concrete beneath her. She pressed her back against the cold wall, looking even smaller and more vulnerable. "Please, Mr. Warburton," she whispered, her voice almost disappearing. "The medication costs a fortune, and without it she'll die. I'd do anything for her. I know stealing is wrong, but losing her, I just can't." The young girl's voice cracked, her large, tear-filled eyes pleading. Lucas stepped closer, his imposing frame casting a dark shadow over the small, curled-up figure. In the dim alley light, her tears glistened on her dirt-streaked face, adding a fragile, desperate gleam. He was a powerful man, a seasoned businessman, known for making hard choices without a second thought. Yet, here he was, at a strange crossroads. "So, little thief," he said in a dangerously calm voice, "why shouldn't I call the police right now?" Jenny lifted her tear-stained face, her dark, pained eyes meeting his with a last, silent plea. Her whole body trembled, a mix of pain, fear, and overwhelming desperation. "If I go to jail," she managed through the sobs, "who will look after her? My mom. She has no one but me." Lucas stared at her, his sharp gaze taking in her every movement, every shiver. Blood from her knee pooled on the filthy ground, but it was her helpless voice that unsettled something deep inside him. He was no stranger to lies, but her despair seemed real, in a way he couldn't easily dismiss. "Prove it," he said finally, his voice cold and unyielding. "Prove you're telling the truth, or I'm calling the cops." Jenny swallowed, struggling to steady her breathing, her small hands wiping away streaks of tears and grime. She tried to stand, stifling a cry as her weight bore down on her injured leg. "My name is Jenny," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "I can show you, if you come with me." Lucas chuckled humorlessly, adjusting the sleek watch on his wrist, his impatience evident. Following a street kid to who knows where seemed absurd, but something about her resolve, the way she said her name, struck a chord. "If this is a setup," he warned, his tone menacing, "you'll wish the cops had gotten to you instead." Jenny limped toward the edge of the alley, each step a testament to her stubborn resolve, her pain masked behind a flicker of hope. Blood was still seeping from her knee, leaving a dark trail as she pushed forward, refusing to slow down. "It's not far," she muttered, mostly to herself. "Hang on, Mom, I'm coming back." As they moved deeper into the neighborhood, the surroundings grew shabbier. Lucas took in the sight of crumbling buildings, broken windows, and litter-strewn sidewalks with an increasing sense of unease. His Italian suit and polished shoes felt painfully out of place against the backdrop of poverty. "Where exactly are we going?" he asked, his voice edged with a note of worry. "This doesn't seem like the type of area where you'd find high-priced medicine." The girl stopped outside a small, dimly lit pharmacy. Through the dusty windows, he could see shelves that were sparsely stocked. Her hands trembled as she pointed. "The meds. They're in there," she said, her voice catching. "Each box is really expensive, and she needs 3 a month. That's what I was trying to get." The shop was cramped and dimly lit, with dust covering the mismatched products on the shelves. A weary-looking pharmacist glanced at Jenny, his eyes narrowing slightly as he noticed her torn clothes and scraped knee. "My mum's medicine," she said, her voice unsteady. 3 boxes of the—" "I'll handle it," Lucas interjected, reaching for his wallet. As he flipped through a stack of large bills, he saw the pharmacist's eyes widen at the sight. The girl stood quietly beside him, her fingers clutching the frayed hem of her shirt. You're paying for my mum's medicine?" she asked, barely holding back tears, her young eyes filled with gratitude. Without addressing her directly, Lucas turned to the pharmacist. How Much per box?" he asked flatly. The counter employee, obviously impressed by the well-dressed man in front of him, stammered out the price. Lucas nodded, placing the full payment on the counter without hesitation. "How long has your mother been sick?" he asked, his eyes averted, avoiding her question. Jenny swallowed, watching the pharmacist hurry to gather the boxes. 3 months, she whispered, her gaze locked on the medicine now in front of her. "At first, we could manage. But then..." Her voice broke, and she wiped away a tear with her dirty hand. "Insurance won't cover it, and each box costs more than a month's rent." Lucas slipped the change into his pocket and took the bag of medicine, his face a steady mask. But inside, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that came from the way the girl's eyes tracked his every move, as if expecting him to suddenly turn away. "Where to now?" he asked, his tone still firm but gentler than before. "And don't try anything funny," he added. Jenny limped over to the door, clutching the bag of medicine to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her together. Her hands trembled slightly as she pointed out the direction. "It's close by," she said, her voice carrying an urgency that hadn't been there moments before. "Mum needs it right away. She wasn't doing too well when I left." The walk to Jenny's home was brief, but each step felt heavier than the last. Her aging structure loomed over the nearby, equally worn-out buildings like a shadow, with walls that alluded to better times long since past. Jenny's anxious gaze darted around as they approached. "This is it," she murmured, her hands shaking as she pushed open the broken door. "Please, don't judge by what you see." Inside, the sight was even more dismal than the exterior. The cramped room was filled with worn-out furniture, and a mix of mildew and something more troubling hung in the air, a hint of sickness. Lucas felt his stomach twist, not from the poverty surrounding him, but from the rawness of it all. "Where's your mum?" he asked, his voice softening as a stillness blanketed the room. Jenny hobbled deeper into the house, her voice rising in desperation as she called for her mother. The silence that echoed back tightened her chest. Lucas trailed her, his expensive shoes creaking against the decayed floorboards. "Mum," her voice quivered. "Please answer." The dim light filtering through the dirty windows revealed a sight that chilled them both. In the center of the small living room lay a woman, unmoving. Her dark hair spread out against her pale face, and her lips were tinged a faint purple. "No, no, no," Jenny cried, dropping beside her mother and forgetting the ache in her knee. "Mum, please, wake up, wake up." Lucas stood frozen in the doorway, watching the scene with an expression that defied description. For the first time in years, the powerful businessman found himself utterly lost on what to do. Jenny's genuine panic and the fragile figure lying on the floor began to chip away at his hardened indifference. Does she need help?" he managed to ask, his voice rougher than usual. The young girl was sobbing uncontrollably now, her slight shoulders shaking as she clung to her mother. Tears streamed down her face, falling onto Samantha's lifeless one as her small hands frantically sought any sign of life. "Please," she pleaded, her voice cracked with sorrow. "Don't leave me, Mommy. I got the medicine. I'm here." A faint siren broke through the silence, making Lucas flinch. His gaze shifted from the still figure on the floor to the heartbroken girl, and for the first time, the man who had built his empire by crushing others felt the weight of his choices press down on him. If only I had listened sooner, he thought, bitterness filling his mouth. If only I hadn't wasted all that time on revenge. Breaking free from his paralysis, Lucas moved quickly to check Samantha's pulse, his fingers trembling as he touched her neck. In that miserable room, time seemed frozen as 3 lives balanced on a thin thread. "There's still time," he murmured, pulling his cell phone from his pocket. "There has to be." With unsteady hands, Lucas dialed 911, his eyes never leaving Samantha's still form on the floor. Jenny kneeled beside her mother, gently shaking her shoulders, begging her to wake up. Lucas's own voice's desperation startled the operator when he picked up the phone. "I need an ambulance now," he said, urgency overriding his usual cold demeanor. "We have an unconscious woman here, barely breathing. Please hurry." Within 10 minutes, which felt like hours, the sound of sirens began echoing through the narrow street. Lucas ran outside, waving frantically to guide the paramedics in. His polished shoes sank into the mud, but for the first time, he didn't care at all about his appearance. "Hurry over here," he called out, his voice raw with anxiety. "She's not looking good." The paramedics rushed into the cramped house, their steps precise as they carried in their medical gear and stretcher. They moved quickly, expertly checking Samantha's vitals, while Jenny clung to her mother's hand, refusing to let go until one of the medics gently guided her aside. "Blood pressure is dangerously low," one of them announced, hooking up monitoring equipment. "We need to move her now." Without thinking, Lucas stepped forward and lifted Samantha into his arms. Hours earlier, his Italian suit was a mark of authority. Now, it was soaked with her cold sweat as he carefully set her down on the stretcher. "We're going with her," he said firmly, brooking no objections. "The girl is her daughter." Moments later, the wail of the ambulance siren echoed through the city streets. Inside, paramedics worked urgently over Samantha's still form, while Jenny held her hand tightly, silent tears streaking down her smudged face. Across from her, Lucas sat tensely, his fingers gripping his knees so hard his knuckles went white. "Please don't die," Jenny sobbed. "I swear I'll never take anything again. Just don't leave me alone." The stretcher sped down the hospital halls, Jenny limping as she struggled to keep pace, oblivious to her own injured knee. Lucas followed close behind, his expensive suit now disheveled and stained with Samantha's blood. "Weak pulse. Pressure's dropping," shouted one of the doctors, pushing the stretcher with urgency. "We need immediate access." The ER doors swung shut, leaving Jenny and Lucas in the hallway. Jenny pounded her small fists against the doors, a strangled cry escaping her. Without even understanding why, Lucas placed his hands on her trembling shoulders, stopping her from further hurting her bruised hands. "They'll do everything they can," he murmured, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "You have to be strong, okay?" And so the hours stretched on in the stark, quiet hospital corridor. Jenny sat curled up in one of the waiting room chairs, her tear-streaked eyes locked on the doors her mother had vanished behind. Lucas paced restlessly nearby, his cell phone forgotten in the pocket of his coat, now marked by grime and wrinkles. The steady click of his polished shoes against the floor echoed in the empty hallway, each step marking time like a somber metronome. "If she dies, because of me," he thought, running a hand through his graying hair. "How can I ever forgive myself?" A nurse approached with a first aid kit, gently insisting on cleaning and bandaging Jenny's knee. Jenny barely felt the sting as the nurse tended to her. Her mind was entirely on her mother. Lucas watched, guilt twisting inside him as he noticed her scraped knee, a painful reminder of her injuries from the escape. "I should have trusted her from the start," he berated himself. "How much time did I waste, blinded by revenge?" The sudden creak of doors snapped them both out of their thoughts. A doctor appeared, his expression serious as he approached. Jenny jumped to her feet, almost stumbling, her small frame trembling with fear. Instinctively, Lucas stepped forward, placing himself beside her, as if to shield her from the news. "How is she?" they asked together, their voices carrying a shared sense of dread. The doctor glanced between the young girl and the disheveled businessman, briefly registering the odd pairing but quickly refocusing, maintaining his composure. "We've stabilized her," he began, his tone steady but cautious, "but her condition remains critical." Jenny clutched Lucas's coat, her legs weak and shaking. Without thinking, Lucas placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a quiet, steady presence. The doctor continued with medical terms that seemed to swirl around Jenny's head. "Please," she whispered, her voice quivering. "Just tell me. Will she make it?" A tense silence hung in the air as the doctor took a moment to choose his words carefully. Lucas felt Jenny trembling under his hand, and an ache rose in his chest. "The next few hours will be crucial," the doctor finally replied. "We're doing everything we can." Nurses and doctors kept moving in and out of the room, carrying equipment and supplies, their movements shadowed by Jenny's watchful eyes as she refused to sit again. Lucas had loosened his tie, no longer trying to maintain his usual spotless image. "How much is it to move her to a private room?" he asked suddenly. "The best one available." The doctor hesitated, glancing between the two of them before replying. His face grew more serious as he carefully laid out the details. The numbers he mentioned left Jenny feeling faint, but Lucas merely nodded, already reaching for his phone. "Do whatever needs to be done," he ordered in his business tone. "Money is not an issue." The next hours blurred by in a rush of beeping machines and doctors moving swiftly around the room. Jenny watched in a daze, her eyes wide with fear, while Lucas made calls, using his connections to secure the best care for Samantha. He spoke with authority, cutting through red tape like it was nothing. "She has to make it," he murmured to himself between calls. "I can't live with this on my conscience." Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the lead doctor returned to give them an update. He looked worn out from hours of intense work. Jenny moved toward him almost in a trance, barely feeling her legs under her. Lucas stood beside her, unconsciously gripping her small, grimy hand. "Please," she whispered, her voice faint. "Tell me she'll be okay." The doctor sighed, nervously adjusting his glasses. His gaze rested on Jenny, filled with a compassion that made Lucas's chest tighten. "We've managed to stabilize her," he said carefully, "but I have to be upfront with you." He paused, choosing his words. "The delay in treatment," he continued, voice faltering, "has led to severe complications." Jenny's grip on Lucas's hand tightened as the doctor outlined the seriousness of her condition. Every word felt like a punch to Lucas, a harsh reminder of the precious time lost chasing a desperate child through the streets. The doctor spoke of organ damage, complications, and lowered chances of recovery, but all Lucas could focus on was Jenny's silent sobs beside him and his own guilt. "The time we lost today," he thought bitterly, "may have cost her life." A commotion in the hallway, as a police officer entered the waiting area, abruptly cut off their somber conversation. His footsteps echoed loudly on the polished hospital floor as his eyes scanned each face in the waiting area. Lucas was the first to notice him. A chill settled in his chest when he realized the officer's intense gaze had landed on Jenny. The tired, worried girl hadn't even noticed the approaching figure of authority. "Not now," thought the businessman, rising to his feet. "Not when things are already so overwhelming." The officer moved forward with the confidence of someone who had zeroed in on his target. His crisp, clean uniform made a stark contrast to Jenny's disheveled clothes as she sat clutching the medicine she had just picked up for her mom. "Jenny Harper," the officer called, his voice ringing loudly in the otherwise quiet hallway. Instinctively, Lucas positioned himself between the officer and Jenny, his body tight with tension. Years of tough negotiations had taught him to stay calm under pressure, but his voice betrayed a hint of unease. "Officer, this young girl is going through a very delicate time," he said, his tone smooth and controlled. "Her mother is in serious condition." The officer shook his head, unaffected by Lucas's plea. He took a paper from his pocket and handed it to Lucas, whose hands trembled slightly as he took it. It was an arrest warrant, listing several minor thefts in the area. "I'm sorry, sir," the officer said, his tone detached and professional. "But she's got a history. This time, we can't let it slide. We've been searching for her, and when we got word of a homeless girl at the hospital, we had to come check." Jenny seemed to shrink in her chair, her fearful eyes darting between the officer and the doors leading to the emergency room, where her mother was fighting for her life. Tears she had been holding back started to roll down her dirt-streaked face. "Please," she whispered, her voice wavering. "My mum, she needs me here." Lucas tried everything, offering to post bail and even promising to take responsibility for Jenny, but the officer didn't budge. Each of his appeals was met with cold, procedural responses that didn't account for the desperation of the moment. "I can't ignore the law," the officer said, reaching for his handcuffs. "Even for someone in your position." The metallic click of the cuffs unlocking seemed to jolt something deep within Jenny. She sprang to her feet, her small hands gripping Lucas's arm with a strength that surprised him. "Don't let them take me," she begged, her voice trembling with fear. "I need to know if she's all right. My mum, please. I have to stay here with her." The hospital corridor erupted into chaos. Jenny struggled as an officer attempted to cuff her, her pleas reverberating down the hallway. Lucas's voice rose in anger, his typically calm expression contorted in frustration. "She's just a terrified kid," he thundered, drawing the attention of nearby nurses and patients. "Where is your compassion?" Amid the commotion, a piercing sound split the air as a monitor alarm blared from the emergency room. The doors burst open as a medical team rushed through, shouting, "Emergency!" down the corridor. Jenny's face went pale as she recognized the room number. "Mom!" she screamed, desperately trying to break free. "No! Please let me go! She needs me!" Lucas's heart clenched as he watched her struggle, crying out in despair. The officer held her tightly, though a flicker of doubt passed across his face. More medical staff hurried toward the emergency room with equipment, their voices urgent. "Is this really your duty?" Lucas snapped, bitterness in his voice. "Cuffing a child while her mother's dying." The hallway's chaos seemed to intensify. Nurses darted past with medical carts, doctors called for more medication, and Jenny was pulled toward the exit, her pleas growing more frantic. Lucas looked back and forth between the emergency room and Jenny being led away, anguish settling in. How did it come to this, he thought. The oversized handcuffs made Jenny's thin wrists appear suffocated, and her tear-stained face and scraped knees showed how desperate she was. "Wait, please." Lucas tried once more to say, "Just let her stay until we learn about her mother." But a loud alarm from the emergency room drowned out his words. A doctor emerged from the room, barking orders to get the transfer for Jenny's mother underway. His words were technical, but the urgency in his tone underscored the critical nature of the situation. Jenny caught fragments: cardiac arrest, unstable, risk of death, as she was pulled farther down the hall. "No!" she screamed with all her strength. "Let me stay with her, please!" Lucas stood helpless, watching Jenny's pleas fade as she was led to the police car. At the same time, Samantha's stretcher rushed toward an ambulance, its monitors beeping as doctors shouted instructions. What have I done? Lucas thought, feeling the weight of his guilt grow. If only he'd trusted her sooner. His last image of Jenny was burned into his memory. Her tear-streaked face pressed against the glass of the police car, hands bound, watching as the ambulance carrying her mother drove off in the opposite direction. The wailing sirens mixed with her sobs, a sound Lucas knew he'd never escape. "I'll make this right," he vowed, his voice barely more than a whisper, "even if it's the last thing I do." The private hospital was a stark contrast to the chaotic ER they had come from. Polished floors and bright hallways replaced the frenzied atmosphere of the public hospital, but the tension hung just as heavy. Through the glass of the ICU, Lucas watched the medical team fighting for Samantha's life. The erratic beeping of the monitors mirrored the rhythm of his own panicked heart. "I can't let her die," he murmured, dragging a hand through his graying hair. Not after tearing her away from her daughter. Time seemed to stretch as doctors and nurses moved in and out, their faces grim. Gone was Lucas's usual sharp, businesslike exterior. His once immaculate suit was wrinkled and stained, his tie abandoned somewhere along the way, and exhaustion lined his eyes. Calls from his office flooded his phone, but he ignored them all. "Contracts? Now?" he scoffed bitterly, declining another call. "There's a life on the line." A lead doctor approached, a stack of results in hand, and an unspoken heaviness in his eyes. The words came slowly, carefully, but Lucas understood the message buried in the pauses. They were running out of options. "We need someone who can turn this around," he cut in, not waiting for the doctor to finish. "Who's the top specialist in the country for this?" His fingers shook as he dialed numbers, making calls he'd never thought he'd make. His name got him access. His resources tore down barriers, but with each desperate call, he could feel the seconds slipping away. "I don't care how much it costs," he repeated firmly with every negotiation. "Get them here now." Lucas's focus was solely on the rhythmic, unsettling sounds of Samantha's monitors, each irregular beep echoing the urgency of the moment. Money had never felt so pointless, he thought, as another bank transfer was processed. What's the use of all this influence if I can't even save a life? The specialist's arrival caused a ripple of tension across the hospital floor. Known for his expertise, he was met with a mix of awe and anxiety by the regular staff as he reviewed Samantha's case with a critical eye. Standing near the ICU door, Lucas shifted his gaze back and forth from Samantha's pale face to the doctor, trying to read his expressions with every new test result. "She has to pull through," he repeated to himself. "I have to bring good news to Jenny." The next several hours unfolded in a relentless sequence of specialized tests and treatments. The specialist worked with unwavering concentration, ordering exams that Lucas had never even heard of. Each result was analyzed with precision that left no detail untouched. "There's something we're not seeing," the doctor murmured under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. Lucas watched closely, searching every subtle movement and every flicker of expression, hoping to uncover a hint about Samantha's condition. The other doctors, equally tense, monitored the situation, their faces showing the intense seriousness of the circumstances. The machines created a grim soundtrack, marking the passing time. "How much longer must we wait?" Lucas asked, his voice betraying his unease. "Is there anything we can do?" he pressed. The specialist looked up from the results, his face etched with concern that hit Lucas hard. Holding the trembling papers, he walked over, his typically steady gaze now shadowed with something ominous. "In my 30 years of practice," he began, his tone carefully restrained, "I've never come across a symptom pattern like this." A chill ran through Lucas. His years of negotiations had taught him to read people, and the specialist's tense stance was deeply troubling. The doctor continued, choosing his words with precision, each phrase landing heavily. "There's an unexpected complication," he explained, showing the test results. "It's something the usual procedures didn't account for." The hospital hallway felt as if an unexpected chill had swept through it. Lucas leaned heavily against the wall, his legs threatening to give out under the weight of the doctor's words. Other staff members gathered, forming a tense semicircle around the specialist. "How much time?" Lucas managed to ask, his voice sounding strange even to himself. "How long does she have?" The specialist adjusted his glasses, the gesture feeling more like a stalling tactic than anything necessary. He scanned the charts again, as though hoping to find a different answer among the pages. "It's not really about time," he said at last, his tone carrying a gravity that hinted at a bigger issue. "It's about what we're dealing with." In the background, the monitors beeped a steady, lifeless rhythm, a reminder of the fragile life at stake. Lucas moved closer to the ICU's glass window, staring at Megan's pale face, so hauntingly similar to his daughter's. The specialist joined him, his presence heavy with years of experience and unspoken concerns. "Mr. Warburton," he began, voice quiet yet steady, "what we've uncovered here is unlike anything I've encountered before." Lucas turned slowly, meeting the doctor's serious gaze. The hospital hallway felt frozen in time, each second stretching painfully as he awaited an explanation. The specialist held the medical files like they were a ticking time bomb, his professional mask of concern hinting at something far more unsettling. "Just tell me," Lucas said, voice trembling. "What did you find?" Meanwhile, Jenny's small wrists were bound in handcuffs as she was led through the police station's cold, echoing hallways. Tears had dried on her face, leaving trails on her tired cheeks, but her eyes still held a spark of desperation. The officers guided her without pause, ignoring her broken voice and repeated pleas. "Please," she rasped, her throat raw from crying. "Can someone just call the hospital? I need to know about my mom." The booking process felt like pure torture. Each question, each photo taken, and each fingerprint collected was time slipping away from her mother's side. The harsh fluorescent lights made her eyes sting, but not nearly as much as the tears she held back. "One call," she whispered to every passing officer. "I just need to know if she's okay." The cell was small and cold, with a hard concrete bench along the wall and a tiny barred window near the ceiling. The heavy clang of the door shutting felt like a judge's gavel sealing her fate. Jenny curled up in the corner, still in cuffs, her hands shaking as she hugged her knees tightly. "Mom, please hang on," she whispered into the silence, desperation filling her voice. "Just hold on a little longer." The minutes stretched painfully, each passing second dragging like an eternity. Whenever footsteps echoed down the hall, Jenny would rush to the bars, her eyes flashing with renewed hope. But each time, the officers passed her cell without so much as a glance. Some looked away, others ignored her altogether. "I just need to know if she's okay," she'd beg, her voice growing weaker with each plea. "Please, someone tell me." Exhaustion pressed down on her, yet she resisted the urge to sleep. Every time her eyes closed, she saw her mother lying lifeless on the floor at home, her face colorless, body still. The sound of her cuffs against the bars as she shifted restlessly was a constant reminder of her helplessness. The agonizing thought haunted her. What if she's gone and I'm not there? At the hospital, Lucas was fixed on the doctor's words, his face paling with each new revelation. Samantha's condition was more complicated than they'd anticipated, a rare mix of factors that made regular treatments useless. The doctor pointed to scattered test results, indicating strange patterns only he seemed to fully grasp. "There might be a way," he said cautiously, "but I have to be upfront about the risks." Standing outside the ICU, Lucas's eyes stayed on Samantha through the glass as the specialist explained her unique case. The steady hum of the monitors and occasional blips only heightened his worry. The test results in the doctor's hands revealed an illness spreading in a way he'd never seen, attacking her body in unpredictable ways. "It's as if each organ's reacting differently," the doctor said gravely. "The usual treatments aren't enough." Running his hands over his tired face, Lucas's mind bounced between Samantha lying unconscious and the haunting memory of Jenny being led away in cuffs. The doctor began describing an option, a new experimental treatment, barely out of the trial phase, and suited for severe cases like Samantha's. "There's a possibility," he said carefully, "but I need to be entirely honest about the dangers involved." The procedure was groundbreaking, but each statement from the specialist carried a sense of doubt. Prior outcomes were scarce, and this kind of intervention had never been tried on a case as advanced as Samantha's. "Her body's severely weakened," the doctor warned, gesturing toward the monitors. "The treatment itself could prove deadly." Lucas stepped closer to the observation window, his gaze locked on Samantha's pale face, so reminiscent of his daughter's. The machines and tubes sustaining her seemed far too delicate for the fight that lay ahead. "And if we do nothing?" he asked, his voice barely steady, dreading the answer. "How long does she have?" The specialist moved beside him, staring at Samantha with the same somber intensity. His expression conveyed everything before he even spoke. "Without drastic action, she won't make it past the week," he replied, his words cutting to the heart of the matter. "Every major organ is shutting down." Lucas watched the heart monitor's faint pulses on the screen, each beat a fragile lifeline. The specialist explained how the experimental procedure would operate, a grueling process requiring Samantha's body to fight as never before. "If she survives the initial step," he added, his tone heavy with caution, "we'll still need to see if her body responds." Lucas closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of the decision settle on him. The image of Jenny, crying in the back of the police car, wouldn't leave his mind. "I can't keep stalling," he thought, guilt gnawing at him. Yet the dread lingered. What if the treatment went wrong? The specialist sensed his hesitation and leaned in, his voice lowering. "Mr. Warburton, you must fully understand. Even if she makes it through, her chances of a complete recovery are slim. And the process," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "it's going to be extremely painful for her." Lucas opened his eyes, meeting the specialist's gaze with such intensity that the man took a slight step back. The decision was brutal. Risk the treatment, which could end her life, or watch her slip away slowly and helplessly. "And if she doesn't survive the procedure?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "How will I tell Jenny that her mother died while we tried to save her?" The specialist had no response. Only the constant beeps of the machines and the soft hum of the ventilators broke the silence in the ICU. Samantha continued her silent fight, unaware of the heartbreaking choices being made about her life. The doctor finally spoke up, his voice heavy with years of hard-earned wisdom. "If we don't attempt the treatment, she'll die. If we do, she might still die, but there's a chance." Lucas held the specialist's gaze, his own expression fierce and unwavering. "Go ahead with the treatment. Do whatever it takes. Use every resource," he commanded, already reaching for his phone. "I'll go bring her daughter. She has to be here in case—" His voice trailed off, leaving the harsh reality hanging unspoken. The drive to the police station felt like a never-ending ordeal. Each minute in traffic stretched unbearably as his mind shifted between anxiety for Samantha and regret for allowing Jenny to be taken away in handcuffs. The unusual tension in his typically calm boss caught the driver's attention as he cast a glance in the rearview mirror. "How did I let it get this far?" he muttered under his breath, fiddling with his loosened tie. "How could I have missed this?" The police station loomed ahead, a dull, intimidating building. Lucas entered with purpose, his presence and reputation parting the way that would normally be closed. "I'm here to post bail for Jenny. She was brought in earlier," he announced, his voice carrying down the hallway with authority. "I need her out of here immediately. Her mother is dying, and she needs to be at the hospital now. I'll cover her bail." Jenny sat huddled in a cell corner when she heard footsteps approaching. Her wrists, still bound, were sore and bruised from pounding on the bars, and her face bore traces of dried tears. She looked up as Lucas arrived, a mix of surprise and hope flickering in her eyes. "My mum," she began, her voice raw. "She's alive," Lucas replied quickly, noticing the bruises on her delicate wrists. "I'm taking you to her." The ride to the hospital was enveloped in tense silence, broken only by Jenny's occasional, quiet sobs. Lucas observed her from the corner of his eye, noticing how small and delicate she looked in his leather seat. "There's a new treatment," he said quietly, reassuring her. "The doctors are doing everything possible." The ICU was calm when they arrived, only the steady beeping of the monitors breaking the silence. Jenny ran to the window, pressing her little hands against the cold glass. Lucas gestured to the nurses to allow him and Jenny inside, and they obliged. The nurses helped them prepare, outfitting them with masks, caps, and sterile gowns. "Just a few minutes," one nurse cautioned. "She's very weak." As Jenny approached the bed, it was a sight that took his breath away. Samantha, sensing her daughter's presence, began to move her fingers faintly. With effort, her eyes opened, gradually focusing on Jenny's face. "My sweet pea," she whispered, her voice barely a breath beneath the oxygen mask. "You came back." Jenny gently took her mother's hand, as if it might break. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she forced a smile. "Mum, this is Mr. Lucas," she said, nodding toward the businessman standing by the door. "He paid for the hospital, for the medicine. He's helping us." Samantha slowly turned her head, her gaze meeting Lucas's. In her eyes, he saw a deep understanding, a silent appeal that tugged at his heart. "Please, take care of her. I don't know." Her voice was faint, each word a struggle. "I don't know how much longer I have. She has no one else, please." Lucas stepped closer, his usually stern demeanor softened by the moment's emotion. Samantha squeezed Jenny's hand weakly, her eyes still locked onto his. "Promise," she whispered, her voice fading. "Promise you'll protect my little girl." The monitors began to fluctuate, the numbers on the screen shifting in a troubling way. Samantha's breathing grew shallow, her eyes struggling to stay open. "Be strong," she murmured to Jenny, gathering her last strength. "Mummy loves you more than anything." Jenny leaned over her mother, her tears falling onto Samantha's pale face. Lucas placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder, his voice steady with emotion. "I promise," he said solemnly, "I'll take care of her, as if she were my own." Out of nowhere, a piercing alarm rang through the room. The numbers on the screens started dropping fast, while red lights blinked across the equipment. Samantha's grip on Jenny's hand went limp. "Mom," Jenny cried, fear filling her voice. "Mom, please, don't go." Lucas had just enough time to pull her back as the medical team rushed in. The alarms blared louder, and voices shouted orders, calling for supplies. Jenny's last glimpse of her mother was her face, fading behind a blur of white coats as the room burst into a controlled frenzy, preparing Samantha for emergency surgery. Lucas and Jenny were guided into the waiting room, where each second felt like an eternity. Jenny couldn't stop shaking, her gaze fixed on the doors her mother had disappeared through. "She's going to make it, right?" Her voice was barely a whisper as she clutched at Lucas's sleeves. "She has to pull through." Lucas did his best to stay calm for Jenny, though he was struggling himself. Every time the double doors swung open and a medical staff member passed, his heart raced. The businessman, usually so composed and confident, was now speechless, holding tightly to the frightened girl's hand. "She's as tough as you are," he murmured, his voice strained with emotion. "And she's in the best hands." Hours slipped by, each one harder than the last. Jenny refused to move from her place by the door, as if staying close could somehow help her mum. After standing for so long, her legs shook, and Lucas gently helped her to a chair. "You need to rest a little," he said softly. "Your mum will need you to be strong when she's out." As he watched Jenny finally nod off in an uncomfortable position, exhausted from the day's events, Lucas's coffee from the vending machine sat unfilled. Even asleep, her face held a worry no child should carry. How could life shift so drastically in a single day, he wondered, draping his jacket over her small shoulders. Earlier, I was chasing her. Now, I'm all she has. A doctor came out of the double doors, a surgical mask hiding his expression. Lucas jumped up, startling Jenny awake. The doctor walked over to them, his gloves still marked with blood, turning their stomachs. "The surgery's proving more challenging than we anticipated," he said with a heavy tone. The hours stretched on, each one more unbearable than the last. Jenny's silent tears dampened Lucas's jacket, still draped over her shoulders. The businessman kneeled down in front of her, his hands trembling slightly as he held hers, searching for words of comfort where there were none. "Remember what your mother used to say," he whispered softly. "You need to stay strong now." The nurses came by frequently, offering updates that only seemed to deepen the anxiety rather than ease it. Each time the doors opened, Jenny sat up in her chair, her red, swollen eyes looking desperately for a sign of good news. Lucas alternated between pacing anxiously down the hall and sitting beside her, both caught in their own cycles of worry. "Why is it taking so long?" she asked again, for what felt like the 10th time. Something must be wrong. The wall clock seemed to taunt them, its hands creeping forward at a painfully slow pace. Lucas had long given up on trying to work, his attention fixed solely on the doors to the surgical center. Jenny eventually dozed off again, her head resting against his shoulder, her tiny frame shuddering with quiet sobs even in her sleep. "If there's a God," he thought, looking up at the sterile white hospital ceiling, "please don't let this little girl lose her mother." Suddenly, the echo of rushing footsteps startled them both. Urgent voices filled the hallway as medical personnel hurried by, calling for more equipment. Lucas's heart sank as he caught sight of the tense faces of the team rushing back into surgery. "What's happening?" Jenny asked, panic creeping into her voice. "Why are they running?" The specialist darted through the double doors without pausing, his words echoing back to another doctor. "We need more blood units. Now." Jenny clutched his hand so tightly that her small nails left imprints on his skin. "Blood," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Why does she need blood?" Hours turned into a blur of activity. Doctors and nurses streamed in and out, all with tense expressions and hurried movements. Lucas lost track of how many blood bags he saw rushed into the surgical room. Jenny, her head resting on his arm, watched every movement, fear written in her eyes. "I've never seen this many doctors before," she murmured. "Is that good or bad?" And then, just as suddenly, everything fell silent. The frantic pace stopped, voices faded, and for a moment an unnerving calm settled over the hallway. Lucas felt a chill creep up his spine as he noticed the hospital staff exchanging uneasy glances. Something wasn't right, he thought, his heartbeat quickening. This kind of silence didn't feel normal. Suddenly Jenny stood up, her eyes, swollen from endless tears, locked onto the doors of the surgical unit with a fierce intensity. Lucas rose too, instinctively placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "She's going to be okay," he said, hoping he could believe his own words. "Your mum's strong. She's got this." At last, the specialist emerged through the double doors, removing his surgical mask with a slowness that didn't seem like good news. The fatigue on his face was unmistakable, but there was something else there, something that made Lucas's stomach drop. Jenny moved forward, but he held her back, noticing the somber look on the doctor's face. "Mr. Warburton," the doctor began, his voice heavy. "We need to talk." The specialist guided Lucas a few steps away from Jenny, who stayed seated, clutching his coat like it was her lifeline. The hospital hallway grew quieter, only the faint buzz of fluorescent lights breaking the silence. The doctor adjusted his glasses, looking as though the hours spent in surgery had worn him down. "Mr. Warburton, there's something crucial I need to tell you," he said, lowering his voice. "There's a procedure that might save her, but it's incredibly risky. We'd have to cool her body to a precise temperature, and then temporarily stop her heart." Lucas felt his legs weaken, and he leaned against the wall for support. "Stop her heart? And if you can't get it beating again?" "That's why I have to be entirely transparent," the doctor said cautiously. "This has never been attempted here. In fact, it's only been documented 3 times across the country. If we miscalculate during the heart stoppage, if we lose any critical seconds, we may lose her permanently," the doctor explained, his face etched with worry. Lucas glanced back at Jenny, who watched from a distance, fear clear in her eyes. She looked so small and fragile, as she gripped his coat like her only anchor in this stark hospital hallway. "How long do we have to decide?" Lucas asked, his hand running through his graying hair. "Just a few minutes at most," the specialist said, his tone serious. "Her condition is worsening fast. If we're going to proceed, it has to be now." Jenny moved closer to Lucas, nervously twisting the edge of her old t-shirt. He could see her lips trembling as she struggled to keep her emotions in check. Her red, tear-streaked eyes were glued to the doctor's, who were deep in conversation about the upcoming procedure. Her tiny hands shook as she gripped Lucas's arm. "She can't die, Mr. Lucas." Her voice wavered, thick with tears. "She's all I have left in this world. Even when she was sick, she kept taking care of me, even though it hurt her." Lucas watched her fight against the tears, her small frame shaking as she tried to hold it together. "We're doing everything we can, Jenny," he assured her. But Jenny shook her head, her grip tightening. "You don't get it," she said, her voice cracking. "She's always been so strong. Even on the days she could barely move, she'd smile and tell me everything was fine. But I could see the pain. How hard each day was for her." Her voice grew softer, breaking under the weight of the moment. "And now, she's in there alone, and I'm just standing here. I can't help her." The specialist stepped away momentarily and returned with a stack of documents. Jenny's eyes turned to him, filled with desperation. "Please, you have to save my mom. She's all I have." Her gaze returned to Lucas, imploring. "Promise you'll let them try everything? Promise you won't give up on her? My mum needs to get better. You don't know what she's been through." Her voice shook as she continued, her words spilling out between shallow breaths. At night, it was the worst. She thought I didn't hear, but I did. She'd cry in the bathroom, but then she'd come back, smiling, saying, "It's nothing, sweetie. Just a little dust in Mummy's eye." Lucas felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. The choice before him felt more daunting with every second. The specialist stood there, documents in hand, waiting patiently. But Jenny kept talking, as if holding on to these memories would somehow keep her mother with her. "Mum always said I was strong like her," she whispered, eyes on the papers the doctor held. "But I'm not strong, Mr. Lucas. I'm really scared." "We're all scared sometimes," Lucas replied quietly, reaching for the pen. "Even resilient people, like your mum." He signed the paper, taking a deep breath. "If this is Samantha's only shot, I have to let her and Jenny have a fighting chance." A few moments later, the medical team was already moving with focused urgency in the operating room. Through the glass, the monitors displayed Samantha's vital signs, each beep sounding fainter than the last. "Cooling process initiated," the specialist called out, his voice echoing around the room. "Current temperature at 43 degrees and dropping. the doctor noted, checking the equipment. "We need it down to 39 degrees. Then we'll start the controlled cardiac arrest." "Temperature reached," a nurse announced. "Beginning cardiac arrest procedure in 3—" But before she could finish, a high-pitched, unbroken tone pierced the air. The monitors started flashing, red lights casting an eerie glow onto Jenny's frightened face. "No, ma'am, hang on," a nurse called, her eyes locked on the heart rate monitor. "Not yet, please. Not like this." The operating room erupted into organized chaos as the team moved quickly, the cardiac monitor blaring its unbroken tone. Samantha's heart had stopped on its own. Meanwhile, Jenny was clutching Lucas's hand tightly in the hallway. Her gaze stayed fixed on the OR doors, an unsettling feeling building inside her. "Why do I feel like... Mommy's not coming back, Lucas." "I don't want to be without her," she whispered. Lucas could feel her tiny hand trembling. He wanted to comfort her, wanted to say something reassuring, but he knew he couldn't risk giving her hope that might be shattered. "I'll stay with you no matter what," he said softly. "Let's hold on to hope. We can't give up faith." He did his best to console her, but the relentless, shrill tone of the heart monitor seemed to fill the hallway as Lucas held Jenny back, keeping her from banging on the operating room window. A nurse quickly pulled the blinds, leaving them with only the faint sounds of the medical team's voices and that awful, unending sound. "Please, let me see her," Jenny cried, wriggling in Lucas's grip with all the strength she had. "She needs to know I'm here with her." The hospital corridor, usually a haven of order and quiet, had descended into a controlled chaos. Nurses dashed by with emergency carts, the wheels screeching across the polished floor. Doctors were urgently paged through the intercom, their voices reverberating down the hollow hallways. From behind the walls, the specialist's voice, slightly muffled, called out orders. As the defibrillator hummed to life, Jenny shuddered, clutching tightly to Lucas, as if he could shield her from the brutal reality. "I don't want to hear that," she sobbed, covering her ears. "I don't want to hear them hurting her," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "They're not hurting her," Lucas replied, though his voice trembled. "They're trying to bring her back to you." A nurse hurried out of the room carrying a tray loaded with syringes and medication vials. She kept her gaze averted from Jenny, rushing down the hall. Moments later, another nurse entered with blood bags. The clatter of equipment and urgent voices slipped through the partially open door. "Adrenaline now," the specialist's voice ordered. Snaps of ampules and the preparation of syringes filled the air in tense bursts. "Why did they close the door?" Jenny asked, her fingers digging into Lucas's arm. "What if it's the last time I see her? What if—" "Don't talk like that," Lucas interrupted, his voice catching. "Your mum's strong, remember? She's always fought for you and she's fighting now." He tried to sound reassuring, though he was struggling with his own fear. The defibrillator fired again, louder this time, making Jenny jump and bury her face in Lucas's coat, muffling her sobs. Lucas felt her tears seep through the fabric, but for once, material things were the last thing on his mind. "Charging again!" the doctor's voice commanded with urgency. Another nurse rushed out, only to return with more equipment. As the seconds passed in the silent hallway, time seemed to stand still. "Mommy," Jenny whispered through her sobs, her words a plea. "Please don't leave me. I promise I'll be better. I promise I'll never get in trouble again. I'll study harder, just don't go." Her pleas spilled out as Lucas held her close, his heart racing with hers. The defibrillator's shock echoed a third time, causing the hallway lights to flicker. Two young residents pushing an emergency cart zoomed past, looking just as terrified as Jenny. The specialist's voice, filled with years of experience, cut through the room. "Last try." With a commanding tone, the doctor called out, "Clear," and an overwhelming silence took over. Lucas could barely control his breath. It came in quick, shallow bursts. Jenny had fallen silent, as if afraid that any noise might disrupt this critical moment. Then, barely audible, came a faint, uneven beep. It was so soft at first, they almost thought it wasn't real. But then, it happened again, and then again. "We've got a rhythm," the specialist said, his voice sounding both worn and relieved. "Heart rate's weak, but holding. Let's keep a close watch." "Prepare the ICU," he instructed. Jenny dropped to her knees in sudden relief, her legs unable to support her. Lucas caught her, though his own legs were shaky. A nurse stepped over with a small cup of water, her expression one of relief mixed with concern. "Why isn't anyone smiling?" Jenny whispered, noticing the tense, focused faces of the medical team. "If she's back, why are they still worried?" The monitor continued its faint beeping, so soft that everyone strained to hear it. Through the half-closed blinds, Lucas could see the specialist moving rapidly, issuing orders with urgency. "She's back. My mummy's back," Jenny whispered, tears streaking her face. "Please come back stronger. I need you so much." Lucas held Jenny closer, both fixated on the weak, uncertain rhythm of the cardiac monitor. It was a fragile, precious sound, reminding them of the thin line between life and loss. Outside their world, the hospital hallway slowly returned to its regular pace. However, for Lucas and Jenny, time was frozen, leaving only the flimsy, uncertain beeps that held everything they cared about. The specialist eventually reappeared from the operating room, looking worn out and ghostly, his blood-stained gown resembling the scene of a hard-fought battle. Though the corridor seemed calm, the air was heavy with tension, making each breath feel like an effort. After decades of practice, the specialist's hands, usually so steady, trembled as he pulled off his damp mask. "Mr. Warburton," he called out, his voice hoarse from the intensity of the resuscitation effort. "There's one final option, but I need you to understand the risks involved. In Sweden, a research team has been testing a new drug designed for cases like this. The initial outcomes are promising, showing a 60% recovery rate in patients with late-stage conditions." Lucas surged forward, his instincts zeroing in on this sliver of hope. "What does it cost? Where can I get it?" He pulled his phone from the pocket of his stained jacket, barely noticing his trembling hands. "It's complicated," the doctor said, exhaling as he glanced at the clinical notes on his tablet. "The drug is still in phase 3 of clinical trials. It hasn't been approved in almost any country yet. If we tried to bring it in legally, it could take weeks, even months, with all the paperwork involved." He hesitated, carefully choosing his words. The side effects, they could be severe. Jenny, who had been standing silently nearby, clutched Lucas's sleeve. Her tear-stained eyes darted between the two men. "Why are you talking so softly? Is it about my mum? Please tell me what's going on." Lucas dropped to one knee beside her, paying no mind to his expensive suit. "Listen, sweetheart," he said, holding her tiny hands. "There's a special medicine that might help your mum. It's not going to be easy to get, but I'll get it, no matter what." Standing again, he swiftly dialed a number on his phone. "Hello, it's me. Remember the favor you owe me from the mining case? I need your contact at the Swiss embassy right now. No, it can't wait. It's a life-or-death situation." As he waited for the call transfer, he fired off messages on his second phone, alerting contacts around the globe. The doctor watched Lucas's frantic determination with a mix of admiration and worry. "Mr. Warburton," he tried again. "The side effects. We've seen some severe reactions, rejection, anaphylaxis, even multiple organ failure. In one trial." His voice wavered. The patient didn't make it through the first dose. Lucas seemed oblivious to the warnings, fully immersed in his international network, typing quickly between calls in English, Spanish, and French. Meanwhile, on his second line, he addressed his team in Europe. "The cost doesn't matter," he said, his voice carrying down the hall. "Activate the Geneva office. Get someone inside that lab within 15 minutes. Take the company jet. I don't care what it takes. This can't wait until morning." Jenny sat curled up on one of the hallway chairs, hugging her knees close to her chest. The faint, uneven beeping of her mother's heart monitor seemed to mark each remaining second. "Please hang on," she murmured to herself. "Just a bit longer, Mum." In between calls, the specialist took a brief moment to offer another cautionary reminder. "Even if we secure the medication, there are things you need to be aware of," he began. "We'll need a series of pre-tests, compatibility checks, and careful preparation for the patient. There are significant risks involved." But Lucas interjected before he could finish. "How much time does she have left without the medication?" Lucas asked, wiping the sweat from his brow, his voice tense. The doctor consulted her latest test results, his face serious. "Her organs are failing at a rapid pace. 3, maybe 4 hours at best, but we must acknowledge the risk. An allergic reaction could be immediate and fatal." A nurse walked over, handing more test results to the specialists, each flagged in red. After a quick scan, his face grew even grimmer. "Her condition is declining faster than we anticipated. The left kidney is already unresponsive. The right one—" "I'm on it," Lucas interrupted loudly, cutting off the doctor. "The lab agreed to release a dose. My pilot's taking off from Geneva in 10 minutes, and James is securing the regulatory clearances." The next 2 hours were an agonizing wait. Every 15 minutes, Lucas received updates on the plane's location. Jenny stayed by his side, gripping his arm as though he was her last lifeline. "Do you think it will get here in time?" she asked, her voice small and full of fear. "What if it doesn't make it? What if—" "It'll be here," Lucas assured her, with confidence he was struggling to feel. "I've got influential friends in Europe. They're making sure of it." The specialist, using the waiting time, prepped his team and prepared a room equipped with every possible emergency device to administer the medication safely. Jenny's anxiety grew with every new monitor that beeped and clicked. "Why do they need so much equipment?" she asked, gripping Lucas's hand tighter. "Is it really that dangerous?" Before anyone could respond, the loud whir of blades cut through the silence. A helicopter touched down on the hospital's helipad, carrying the precious cargo. Lucas exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The courier arrived moments later, breathless, and carefully handed over a refrigerated case containing the life-saving dose. The tiny vial, no bigger than a thumb, seemed far too small to justify the massive effort it had mobilized. "Last chance to back out," the specialist cautioned, readying the medication. "Once we begin—" His voice trailed off. "Go ahead," Lucas commanded, clutching Jenny tightly. "Without this, she won't make it. I know the risks, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes for her to survive. And I expect the same from you." In the first tense minutes following the injection, everyone watched silently. Samantha's heartbeat, which had been weak and irregular, grew stronger, and a slight pink hue returned to her cheeks. "It's working!" the doctor exclaimed, surprised at how fast the drug was kicking in. "Her heartbeat's getting stronger." But relief only lasted a mere 43 seconds. Suddenly, the monitors erupted into ear-piercing alarms. Samantha's face, which had shown signs of life moments ago, started to flush with red blotches, spreading like wildfire. Her throat visibly swelled, distorting her face. "Severe allergic reaction," the specialist shouted. "Get adrenaline. Corticosteroids. Intubation. Stat, he barked. Hearing the chaos, Jenny rushed to the window of the surgery room, peering inside. She let out a cry as she saw her mother's body convulse on the bed, while the monitor's alarms filled the room in an overwhelming chorus. Lucas wrapped his arms around Jenny to stop her from bolting into the room, his own heart pounding with terror. The blinds snapped shut, leaving them in darkness, with only the sounds of alarms and frantic commands filling the air. The drug that was meant to save Samantha now seemed to be turning into her doom. "Stop!" Jenny cried, pounding on Lucas's chest with her little fingers. "Make them stop! She's hurting! My mum is hurting!" she begged. The specialist moved forward with a syringe of adrenaline, his movements precise amidst the commotion. Samantha's body shook violently on the bed, the tubes and sensors nearly snapping loose with each tremor. Her face and neck were covered in angry red welts, turning her features into a mask of grotesque, allergic agony. The medical team moved with intense urgency, each person performing their task with the swift accuracy that only experience could bring. "Her oxygen levels are plummeting," a nurse shouted, her eyes glued to the monitor. "We need to intubate now, or we're going to lose her." The specialist didn't hesitate, quickly setting up the necessary equipment. "We have no choice," he said firmly. "If we don't act now, her airways could close completely." The next few minutes were a frantic race against the clock. Samantha's throat continued to swell, making the intubation increasingly challenging. The specialist remained composed, though sweat dotted his forehead as he carefully maneuvered the tube. The other doctors watched intently, understanding that even the smallest mistake could be fatal. Outside the room, Jenny's desperate cries echoed through the ICU hallway, breaking through even the thick walls. "Please, Lauren, work with me," the specialist murmured under his breath, inching the tube with meticulous precision. "I know you're struggling, but I need you to let me help." "Her blood pressure's climbing," the resident called out. "The adrenaline's kicking in." Samantha's body was still convulsing, but her movements were beginning to weaken. The angry red blotches on her skin started to fade, though they still covered most of her body. In the hall, Lucas held Jenny back, stopping her from rushing into the room. His heart raced as he watched through the narrow door window. "Why is she getting so still?" Jenny asked frantically, her fingernails digging into Lucas's arms. Is she... "No, sweetheart," Lucas replied, his voice shaky. "The doctors are getting things under control." The hours that followed were a blur of emotions. Every new dose of medication had the medical team on edge, fearing another reaction. The specialist stayed close to Samantha, his eyes constantly on her vital signs, reading every subtle change. At last, the red splotches on her skin began to fade, leaving her skin pale and marked. "Her vitals are stabilizing," a nurse reported after another check of the monitors. "But she's still very weak. Keep a close eye," the specialist instructed. "We're not out of the woods yet." As dawn broke, Samantha's fingers gave the faintest twitch, so small it nearly went unnoticed. The specialist was by her side in seconds, shining a flashlight in her eyes. Minutes later, Jenny, finally allowed into the room, held her mother's hand tightly, as though clinging to life itself. "Mom," Jenny whispered, her cheeks streaked with the traces of dried tears. "Can you hear me? Easy, kiddo," the specialist coached gently. "She's still under heavy sedation." Samantha's eyes fluttered open, hazy and bewildered. A breathing tube kept her from speaking, but when her eyes met Jenny's, it was like, for a second, everything was okay. Standing by the doorway, Lucas felt a tightness in his throat, moved by the simple love shared between mother and daughter. But then he noticed something unsettling in Samantha's gaze, a panic that didn't seem tied to the tube. "Something's not right," Lucas muttered, stepping closer. "Look at her eyes." The specialist quickly began examining Samantha. "Samantha, are you feeling any pain?" Her eyes filled with mounting fear as she began reaching frantically, trying to touch her legs. The specialist's face grew tense, and he immediately started running basic neurological tests. With each test that yielded no response, his expression darkened, while Samantha's attempts to gesture only grew more desperate. "Doctor," Lucas's voice broke with worry. "What's happening to her?" The specialist's response was calm, but barely concealed his own concern. "We need to run more tests." The following moments stretched unbearably. The specialist tapped various points on Samantha's legs, testing reflexes and sensitivity, but there was no reaction. Jenny, watching intently, clung tightly to the bed railing, her small body quivering each time the doctor's face grew more serious. Lucas put a reassuring hand on Jenny's shoulder. "Why aren't her legs moving?" she whispered, her voice almost too soft to hear. "Doctor, why is my mum crying?" Her eyes, filled with tears, reflected the same pain her mother seemed to be experiencing. "I need to speak with both of you," the specialist said, motioning them aside. "If you feel your heart is touched, please comment and let us know the birthday of your beloved one. Every love deserves to be honored." Now, let's continue today's story. The truth struck hard, and without mercy. He explained the neurological damage in solemn detail. A severe lack of oxygen during the crisis, combined with the prolonged seizure, had caused significant spinal cord injury. Jenny listened, silent and wide-eyed as Lucas wrapped his arms protectively around her. She won't be able to walk again, will she?" Jenny finally asked, her voice thick with tears. "We're doing everything we can," the specialist assured. "But right now, she's unable to move." The breathing tube muffled Samantha's quiet sobs, which filled the room with a sorrowful intensity. Her gaze lingered on her unresponsive legs, eyes brimming with tears that streamed down her pale face. Jenny rushed to her mother's side, gripping her hand tightly, while Lucas stood frozen, weighed down by guilt. The specialist observed the family with a heavy heart, aware that their lives had irrevocably changed. "This is my fault," Lucas thought, raking his fingers through his graying hair. "If only I had trusted her from the start." The specialist's calm voice cut off his train of thought almost as if he could read his mind. "This isn't anyone's fault. Sometimes, saving a life demands sacrifices we can't foresee." In the sterile ICU room, amidst the steady hum of machines and glaring lights, emotions of relief and heartbreak intertwined. Samantha had survived, but her world had been reshaped. Jenny oscillated between tears and reassuring smiles, while Lucas kept a quiet, watchful presence. The specialist discussed rehabilitation and the road ahead, though his words seemed distant, as if spoken from another reality. "We'll get through this, Mom," Jenny whispered, pressing a kiss to Samantha's hand. "No matter how, I'll help you every step of the way," she promised, her tear-streaked face a testament to her resolve. "And I won't leave your side," Lucas added, his voice filled with conviction. The hours slipped by as the medical team carefully removed Samantha's breathing tube. Each breath she took without assistance felt labored, as though even the slightest movement required all her strength. The specialist remained close, keeping a vigilant eye on her vitals. At last, when she was able to speak, her voice came out raspy and faint, but her first words were for her daughter, who clutched her hand with unwavering support. "My love, I'm so grateful you're here," Samantha whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Why can't I feel my legs?" she asked, her voice trembling, as much to herself as to anyone else. "Mum, don't talk too much right now," Jenny said, swallowing her tears. "The doctor says you need to rest." the specialist stepped forward, carrying the heavy responsibility of confirming what Samantha feared. He gently explained about the spinal injury, detailing how an intense reaction to the medication had led to nerve damage. Each word seemed to send waves of pain across Samantha's face, etching a look of agony that went deeper than just physical suffering. From the doorway, Lucas watched, his body wound tight like a coiled spring, ready to snap. "How will I work like this?" Samantha asked through her tears. "How will I take care of my daughter?" "Miss Samantha," Lucas finally said, moving closer, "I promise, you won't need to worry about that." But suddenly, Samantha shifted restlessly in her bed, her words becoming fragmented and scattered. Her once pale cheeks turned a flushed red that quickly deepened. The heart monitor started beeping faster, and beads of sweat appeared on her brow. Jenny instinctively stepped back, alarmed, as her mother began to murmur about black-winged angels dancing on the ceiling. "Temperature's rising fast," a nurse reported. "Her fever is spiking," she added. "Mom," Jenny called out anxiously, "why is she talking like that?" The room turned chaotic as Samantha's words swung between clear phrases and feverish babble. She spoke of stairways to heaven and of frozen butterflies landing on her numb legs. Watching the monitors, the specialist's expression subtly shifted, from concern to a glimmer of optimism. "Why are you smiling?" Lucas asked, catching the change in the doctor's face. "This fever," the specialist replied, "might be just what we needed." As the medical team worked to keep Samantha stable, the doctor explained that the fever could mean her immune system was actively responding to the treatment. It was as though her body was mounting a strong internal defense. Jenny's gaze shifted between her mother's flushed face and the screens. "It's like a battle in her body?" Jenny asked, beginning to grasp the situation. "Exactly," the specialist confirmed. "And right now, we need her body's army to keep fighting." As her fever rose, Samantha's hallucinations grew stronger. She began singing lullabies, reaching for invisible things in the air. Occasionally, she called out for her own parents, long gone, seeking their forgiveness for not being a better daughter. When Samantha began screaming about snakes wrapped around her paralyzed legs, Lucas had to hold Jenny back. "Don't leave me," Samantha cried, writhing against her unseen foes. "The snakes, they're squeezing," she whispered, lost in a world of fevered visions. "I have to do something," Jenny pleaded, trying to break free from Lucas's grasp. Just then, a nurse hurried into the room with the latest blood test results in hand. Her somber expression prompted the specialist to abandon his notes and swiftly cross the room. As he read the report, his face gradually drained of color. Lucas, who'd become attuned to the doctor's expressions over the past few hours, felt a shiver of dread. "What now?" he asked, holding on to Jenny. "I need lab confirmation," the doctor replied evasively, already heading toward the door. Meanwhile, Samantha's delirious mumbling mirrored the frantic beeps of the monitors. She began describing a garden where fiery flowers sprouted from her immobile legs, each petal searing her skin without leaving a mark. The specialist soon returned, holding more test results. His face was a blend of professional concern, masking a deeper, more serious unease. "How soon for confirmation?" the nurse asked in a hushed tone. "We're out of time," the specialist replied, his eyes locked on the new results. As the sun started to set, Samantha finally seemed to settle down somewhat. Her temperature had stabilized, though it was still high. Her words, though disjointed, no longer held the same haunting intensity. Exhausted, Jenny had fallen asleep in a chair by the bed after hours of keeping watch. Taking advantage of this moment, Lucas approached the specialist in the hallway. "What did you find in her blood?" he demanded quietly but firmly. "Mr. Warburton," the doctor began, hesitant. "I need you to understand. We're not entirely certain yet." A sudden alarm that was different from the previous beeps sounded from the room, interrupting him. Samantha suddenly awoke, her wide eyes fixed on something only she could see. Her voice, clear and sharp, sliced through the room. "They're here, for me." "Who's here, Mum?" Jenny asked, startled awake. "The angels," Samantha replied. "They say they found something in my blood." A chill ran down Lucas's spine at her words. The specialist was already examining the new monitors, his expression growing more intense with each reading. The powerful businessman, so used to controlling every part of his life, now felt utterly powerless as the situation unraveled. "How could she possibly know?" the specialist mumbled, glancing between the test results and his fever-stricken patient. "Doctor," Lucas spoke, his voice unsteady, "what exactly have you found?" But like a storm finally beginning to quiet, Samantha's fever started to ease off in the early morning hours. The monitors recorded a gradual yet consistent drop in her temperature, each small decrease feeling like a little victory. The specialist watched every change in her vital signs, his face weary but attentive. As her fever faded, Samantha's incoherent words softened, giving way to a calmer, more restful sleep. "Temperature's dropping," the nurse confirmed, checking the digital thermometer. "Finally back to normal." Soft daylight slipped through the blinds as Samantha's eyes fluttered open, her awareness returning bit by bit. The wild, feverish look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a clear, steady gaze. Jenny immediately leaned over her while Lucas stepped closer to the bed, cautious. The specialist began running simple exams, paying careful attention to her neurological responses. "How are you feeling?" he asked, shining a small light in her eyes. "Different," Samantha replied, her voice raspy. "There's something odd in my legs." A tense silence hung in the room as the specialist moved to examine her legs, testing for sensitivity by pressing different points and observing her reactions intently. Suddenly, Samantha let out a gasp that made everyone in the room jolt. "I felt that," she exclaimed, tears welling up. "Doctor, I felt your touch." The examination continued for several more minutes, with Samantha's tears flowing with each new spot of restored sensation. Lucas stood nearby, his heart racing, while Jenny nearly leaped with joy beside her. The specialist scribbled down notes with a barely contained excitement. "The experimental treatment," he murmured, checking his notes. "The fever must have amplified its effect." "Does this mean she'll walk again?" Jenny asked, her voice bursting with hope. Samantha attempted to move in the bed because the sensation in her legs encouraged her, but her muscles weren't yet fully responding to the signals from her brain. Her face tightened with frustration as she realized that, despite feeling the touch, she still couldn't move as she once could. "Why can't I move properly?" she asked, her voice edged with despair. "Stay calm," the specialist advised gently. "Regaining sensation is just the beginning." A team of physiotherapists was promptly brought in to assess her progress. Each test painted a nuanced picture of her recovery. Some areas responded to touch, but others remained frustratingly unresponsive. Samantha's emotions swung between hope and disappointment as new findings emerged. "It's like a map," the lead physiotherapist explained. "Some parts are coming back, while others need more time." "How much time?" Lucas finally asked the question on everyone's mind. Samantha's determination blazed as she insisted on trying to sit up in bed. With the physiotherapist's help, she managed to get up, but her legs shook violently under the strain. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she fought to hold her position, refusing to give up even when her muscles burned. "I can't just stop here," she muttered through clenched teeth. "I have to do this." Her daughter, Jenny, watched with growing concern. "Mum, don't overdo it," she pleaded, worry clear in her voice. "Take it easy." But Samantha pushed on, determined to stand, even as the medical team urged caution. Lucas and the therapist held her securely as she tested her weight on trembling legs. For a fleeting second she seemed steady, but her knees gave out almost immediately. "I've got you," Lucas said quickly, catching her before she could fall. "I won't let you fall," he reassured, relieved. Samantha, however, was inconsolable, frustration spilling over as she whispered, "But I need to." The exercises that followed were planned with greater care. The team outlined a gradual recovery program, beginning with basic movements in bed. Every tiny success was celebrated. Every inch of regained motion was a victory. Jenny stayed by her side, cheering her on with every attempt. "It's like learning to walk all over again," the physiotherapist explained. "Each little step forward counts," she added. "But I'll get there, right?" Samantha asked, worn out after yet another session. As the day went on, the medical team continued their evaluations. Meanwhile, Lucas stepped out to make calls, arranging for specialized therapy equipment to be delivered to the hospital. When he came back, he found Samantha resting lightly and Jenny animatedly sharing with a nurse all the places she planned to take her mum once she was back on her feet. "She's as tough as you," Lucas whispered to Jenny. "She'll beat this." "I know she will," the girl replied, her eyes filled with fierce determination. "My mum never gives up." The specialist meticulously reviewed the most recent tests, comparing them to his earlier notes. His expression held a mix of emotions, some relief at the initial progress, concern for the challenging path ahead, and a hint of something else he hadn't yet mentioned to the family. "The results look promising," he muttered quietly. "But there's still a lot to figure out," he noted, eyeing the fresh blood test results on his desk. The hospital room finally settled into a calm quiet after Samantha dozed off following another therapy session. The steady rhythm of the monitors signaled stability, a rare relief. Lucas glanced at Jenny, noticing how her eyelids drooped with exhaustion after so many sleepless nights in an uncomfortable chair. Her clothes, the same ones she'd been wearing since the day she tried to steal from him, were wrinkled and grimy. "You should get some rest," Lucas urged gently. "Your mum wouldn't want to see you like this," he added, stepping closer. "I don't want to leave her alone," Jenny protested, though her tired voice wavered. "What if she needs me?" Lucas reassured her that the medical staff would take good care of Samantha while they went outside for a bit. He promised her a proper meal and to stop at her house so she could freshen up and change. Jenny hesitated, her eyes shifting from her mum to Lucas until her rumbling stomach made the choice for her. "Just for a little while then," she agreed, kissing her mum's forehead. "Promise we'll be back soon?" she asked, looking hopeful. "I promise," Lucas answered, guiding her out of the room. "And if there's any change, the doctors will call us immediately." Lucas's sleek, luxury car seemed almost absurd as it cruised through the narrow, worn-down streets of Jenny's neighborhood. When they finally pulled up to the old building, something felt different. The front door was blocked with thick wooden planks, and a formal eviction notice hung on top. "No," Jenny murmured, her face turning pale as the reality set in. "This can't be happening," she pleaded, her voice quivering with fear. "Take it easy, sweetheart," Lucas said gently, attempting to calm her down, but she was already bolting toward the entrance. The boards had been loosely attached, leaving a narrow space that Jenny managed to squeeze through. Lucas followed behind, struggling to fit his larger frame through the gap. Inside, the building was eerily silent and shadowed, a haunting reminder of the home that had once been filled with warmth. As they climbed the stairs, more eviction notices plastered the walls, all dated the day they rushed Megan to the hospital. "All our stuff," Jenny whispered, her hands trembling as she reached for the apartment door. "How can I tell her?" Jenny cried out, grief-stricken. The wealthy man tried to console her, but her pain was too deep. "Let me take a look," Lucas said, carefully examining one of the notices. The apartment was frozen in time, just as they'd left it in their haste. Dirty dishes stacked in the sink, a half-empty coffee cup, medicines scattered across the table. Jenny dashed into the bedroom she shared with her mother, only to find eviction notices strewn over the unmade beds. Her sobs filled the vacant walls as she collapsed onto the floor. "I tried so hard," she wept, clutching an empty pill bottle. "I sold candy. I sold things on the street. And when I couldn't, I took just enough for Mum's medicine. But the rent was just too much," she cried, her voice breaking. She explained through sobs how every dollar she earned went toward her mother's medication. She showed Lucas a worn shoebox hidden beneath the bed, packed with crumpled pharmacy receipts and bills. Lucas scanned the papers, a knot tightening in his stomach as he realized the outrageous cost of the medications for a family struggling to put food on the table. "How can I break this to her?" Jenny asked, hugging her knees, her voice filled with despair. "You don't have to tell her right now," Lucas replied resolutely. "Let me handle this." Just then, the shrill ring of his cell phone pierced the heavy silence of the apartment. The hospital's number popped up on the phone screen, making their hearts race. The specialist's voice on the other end sounded oddly pressing, urgent, but not panicked. He chose his words carefully, almost as though he doubted them himself. "I need you to come back right away," the doctor said. "There's something you need to see for yourself." "Has her condition worsened?" Lucas asked, while already steering Jenny toward the door. But instead of giving a clear answer, the doctor simply urged them to hurry. The drive to the hospital was tough. Lucas pressed harder on the gas than he usually would, while Jenny gripped the edge of her seat. Her tears had stopped, but fear still clung to her expression. Though Lucas tried to stay composed, his white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel betrayed him. "Please don't let her die," Jenny murmured over and over, her words like a prayer. "Please, not now." When they finally reached the hospital, the parking lot seemed a mile away from the entrance. Before the car fully stopped, Jenny leapt out, her small legs carrying her straight toward the ICU. Lucas followed close behind, catching up at the elevators. His chest tightened as they watched the floor numbers crawl upward. "Why couldn't they just tell us what happened?" Jenny asked, her foot tapping anxiously. "Sometimes it's better to see things for yourself," Lucas replied, though he didn't believe it any more than she did. At the ICU doors, the specialist stood waiting, his face unreadable behind a mask of calm professionalism. He raised a hand to stop their questions and gestured for them to follow. The hallway stretched endlessly before them, each step echoing like a drumbeat in the stillness. "Brace yourselves," the doctor said as they approached the room. "For what?" Lucas wanted to ask, but his voice failed him when the door opened. Inside, the monitors beeped steadily, their rhythm unchanged, but something else was undeniably different. The room seemed bathed in a softer, warmer light, as though it had transformed. And there, sitting upright on the bed that had once confined her motionless body, Samantha smiled faintly. Her legs dangled off the side of the mattress, her movements weak but full of life. "My love," she said softly, her arms reaching out toward Jenny. "Stay right there," Samantha said with a huge smile, lighting up her face. All Lucas could manage was, "Oh my gosh," as the specialist anxiously flipped through his notes. With slow, deliberate movements, Samantha placed her bare feet on the cold hospital floor, her toes curling from the chill, a feeling she hadn't thought she'd experience again so soon. The specialist took an instinctive step forward to help, but she raised her hand, silently asking him to let her try. "Wait for me, honey," Samantha choked out, her voice trembling with emotion. "I want to walk to you myself." Jenny stood frozen at the door, eyes wide, watching her mother's every move. She clutched the hem of her shirt tightly, almost as if holding herself back from rushing forward. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice soft, with tears streaming down her face. Samantha's first steps were wobbly, like a toddler's, and she leaned slightly on the edge of the bed for balance. But with each inch gained, her movements grew steadier, more confident. The specialist looked on in amazement, his hand moving swiftly across his notes. "It's unbelievable," Samantha whispered, tears of joy brimming in her eyes. "My God, it's truly a miracle." Lucas placed his hands on Jenny's shoulders, feeling her shake with excitement. The specialist, clearly moved, checked the monitors with a shaky voice. The treatment, it worked beyond even our best hopes. The gap between the bed and the door felt longer than ever, and with each of Samantha's steps, everyone held their breath. The monitor's steady beat echoed like a backdrop for this incredible moment. "You're doing it, Mom!" Jenny finally cheered, her excitement spilling out. Lucas sensed Jenny's urge to run to her mother, but she held back, understanding the importance of this moment. Samantha continued with renewed determination, her smile growing with each step forward. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied, now just a few steps away. "I'm coming back to you." With only 2 steps left, Samantha's legs wobbled slightly. For a heart-stopping second, it looked like she might stumble. Lucas instinctively stepped forward, but Samantha quickly steadied herself, her voice strong and clear. "I won't fall," she declared, resolute. Now that she was so close, there was no turning back. The moment Samantha finally reached Jenny was one no one in the room would ever forget. Mother and daughter held each other in a fierce embrace, both sobbing openly, their tears falling freely. Samantha, steadied on her feet, kneeled down to be face to face with her daughter. "My brave little girl," she whispered, covering Jenny's cheeks with kisses. "You gave me the strength to return." Nearby, the specialist moved forward cautiously, his gaze shifting between his medical instruments and the touching scene before him. Despite his years of practice, he had never seen anything quite like this. "We'll need to run a few more tests," he said gently, reluctant to break the moment. "But I can tell you, I've never witnessed such an incredible recovery." Jenny clung to her mum as if she were afraid to let go, fearing her mother might vanish again. The looming threat of eviction lingered in Samantha's mind like a dark cloud, but she couldn't bear to break the moment's perfection. "You're not going to get sick again, are you?" Jenny asked in a wavering voice. "Promise me you'll stay well forever." Standing nearby, Lucas felt a lump rise in his throat, already thinking of ways to handle the eviction without adding to Samantha's worries. Lucas, usually a man with the perfect response in any situation, chose his words with care. "Samantha," he began, his voice softer than ever, "I have an idea for you both." Samantha looked up at him, still holding Jenny close, her expression a mix of curiosity and caution. The last few weeks had been an emotional whirlwind, and here was this man, someone her daughter had once tried to rob, watching her with a look she couldn't quite interpret. "What idea?" she asked, pulling Jenny a little closer. With a steadying breath, Lucas smoothed his rumpled suit reflexively. Years of hard-nosed business deals hadn't prepared him for this. "My house is too big for just me," he said, a gentle smile softening his serious expression. "I've got plenty of room for a family. I'd like you both to come live there with me," he added. Jenny's heart fluttered, the worry of eviction lifting just a bit. She gripped her mother's arm with small, hopeful hands, trying not to cry with relief. "Please, Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please say yes." The specialist, who had quietly kept a respectful distance, took a moment to speak up. "Samantha will need a few more weeks under observation here at the hospital," he explained, glancing over his notes. "The treatment worked, but we need to be sure There's no delayed reaction to the medication. Lucas stepped closer. His once intimidating presence now softened, radiating a warmth that would have seemed impossible just days ago. "It's time for us to hit reset and get ready for what's ahead," he said, his eyes meeting Samantha's with a sincerity that caught her off guard. "A fresh beginning for all of us. What do you think?" Samantha glanced at her daughter, then around the hospital room, and finally back at Lucas. Her legs, newly healed and steady, wavered slightly as the weight of the moment hit her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with disbelief. "Why would you go out of your way to help us? Why take this on?" Lucas's face softened into a rare smile, one that seemed to dissolve his usual reserved demeanor. "Because your daughter showed me a kind of bravery and love I'd never understood before," he said, resting a hand gently on Jenny's shoulder. "And because I made a promise to myself that I'd look after you both." Jenny's eyes welled up with tears she couldn't hold back, though they were no longer tears of sorrow, but of hope and gratitude. The looming fear of eviction that had haunted her seemed to lift like a heavy fog. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion, "Mr. Lucas says he has a big garden where you can plant all your flowers." Samantha couldn't stop her own tears as she embraced her daughter tightly. Their journey had been riddled with hardship, but maybe, just maybe, there was a reason for it all. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice shaky with disbelief as she turned to Lucas. "This is a huge responsibility." Lucas nodded solemnly, his expression unwavering. Nearby, the doctor observed the scene quietly, his pen moving across his notepad with satisfaction. "Well," he said, breaking the silence gently, "it seems we found the most effective recovery treatment of all, a new family." The day Samantha was discharged from the hospital felt like the start of a new season, as refreshing and gentle as a spring breeze. Dressed in the clothes Lucas had provided, she walked down the hall with firm, confident steps. Jenny bounced along beside her, her excitement uncontainable, while Lucas followed behind them with a quiet smile that spoke volumes. The doctor, wrapping up his final instructions, paused to shake Samantha's hand. His expression was one of genuine admiration. "This is a case I'll never forget," he said warmly. "You've redefined what we thought was possible in recovery." As they approached the sleek black car waiting outside, it no longer seemed to Jenny like a symbol of power and wealth, or a reminder of her past mistakes. Instead, it represented a bridge to a future she hadn't dared to imagine. With a gentle smile, Lucas opened the door for Samantha and Jenny, his actions now guided by a kindness that belied his former stoic demeanor. "Ready to see your new home?" he asked, catching Samantha's gaze in the rearview mirror. Beyond the tall iron gates, the mansion loomed, its grand architecture prompting a gasp of awe from Jenny. Just as Lucas had promised, the garden sprawled wide, flowers swaying in the soft afternoon breeze. Samantha held her daughter's hand tightly, speechless, taking in the sight of the place they'd now call home. "It's like a real castle," Jenny murmured, her eyes wide with wonder, reflecting the grandeur before them. At the main entrance, Samantha paused, hesitating at the sight of the marble floors and sweeping staircase. Sensing her unease, Lucas rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. "This place has been empty too long," he said quietly. "It needed life, a family. It needed you." As they toured the house, Jenny darted excitedly from room to room, taking in every detail with uncontainable curiosity. Lucas had prepared a special room for her, painted in soft colors and lined with a small bookshelf. "I wanted to be a part of every detail," he explained, smiling as he watched Jenny eagerly explore her new space. Samantha's room was a spacious suite overlooking the garden, designed with calming tones and sophisticated furnishings. A small door led to an adjacent office, fully outfitted for her physical therapy sessions. "I thought of everything," Lucas said, showing her the equipment. "I want you to be as comfortable as possible for your recovery." At dinner in the elegant dining room, Lucas watched Jenny attempt to copy his table manners, carefully handling her utensils with determined concentration. Samantha guided her with a loving touch, and the businessman felt a warmth in his heart at the sight of their gentle interaction. "It's remarkable how much life can change in just a few days," he thought to himself, feeling a newfound resolve. After dinner, he led Samantha and Jenny to the back garden, where a vine-covered pergola formed a quiet, intimate space. The sunset cast a warm glow across the sky, hues of pink and gold filling the air, an ideal setting for what he needed to say. "Jenny," he called, his voice laced with emotion, "I need to tell you something important." What followed was a moment that would be forever imprinted on their hearts. Lucas, the successful businessman who had once chased wealth and status above all, now spoke with a sincerity he hadn't known was possible. "Jenny, when you tried to steal from me that day, I was a different person. A man who only saw the world in terms of money and power. I used to judge people by how they looked, by their status, by what they could give me." "Or not," Lucas began. "To me, you were just another petty thief on the street, someone who deserved nothing but scorn and punishment. I wanted to chase you down, show you how wrong you were, and make you pay for what I thought was an unpardonable crime. But then, in that dim alley, you showed me a kind of bravery I'd forgotten was real. Not the kind that comes from wealth or power, but courage born from pure, selfless love. Here you were, a kid with barely enough food, ready to face anything just to protect your mother. And here I was, with every resource I could ask for, yet living a hollow life that lacked any true purpose. Your tears that day weren't out of fear for me. They were out of fear for losing the one person you loved most in this world. Understanding that changed something in me. Every hour I spent with you in that hospital taught me lessons in humility and compassion. I watched you stay strong in the hardest moments and saw how deeply you cared for your mom. My old ideas of success, money, status, control, suddenly felt shallow. You showed me that true wealth isn't in a bank balance, a fancy car, or the power to control others. It's in the relationships we build, the love we share, and the courage to keep going when everything feels hopeless. Watching your mom fight for her life made me see that all my wealth meant nothing if I couldn't actually help someone, if I couldn't make a real impact. You, my little one, with your fierce spirit and big heart, taught me that sometimes we have to lose something to find something far more valuable. Looking back, I'm grateful you tried to take from me that day, because it wasn't my wallet you took. It was my heart. And with that, you took away my biases, my foolish pride, and my arrogance. In return, you gave me a new outlook on life, a new family, and a new purpose. This home is yours too, not out of charity or obligation, but because you've taught me what a home truly is. A real home isn't built from luxury. It's built from love, bravery, and second chances. If I'm a changed man today, a better man, it's thanks to you, my little heart stealer. Jenny and Samantha sat quietly, tears streaming down their faces. Slowly, the girl stood, and for the first time since they'd met, hugged Lucas as tightly as her small arms could manage. "Thank you for sticking by us," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. The sun had long slipped below the horizon, but the garden still glowed warmly from the lanterns dotting the path. Lucas reached out to help Samantha to her feet, pleased to see her standing with ease. "Well," he said with a genuine grin, "I think it's time you see the winter garden. Samantha, you're going to love it. There's plenty of room to make a true flower haven." Jenny clung to her mother's hand on one side and Lucas's on the other, and together they wandered through the softly lit garden. Glancing up at the sparkling sky, the businessman pondered how life had curious ways of teaching us its greatest lessons. Sometimes, he mused, we have to feel completely lost before we find our true path. The chirping of crickets and the sweet smell of night-blooming flowers surrounded the three as they strolled toward the winter garden. Samantha looked over at her daughter, now beaming and secure, and then at Lucas, the man who had transformed their lives in ways she hadn't foreseen. Life really is full of surprises, she thought, giving a gentle squeeze to the hands of her unexpected little family. You know, Lucas said, pausing to gaze at the rising moon, I'm beginning to think it wasn't me who saved you. It was you who saved me. The days after Samantha and Jenny returned to Lucas's estate were filled with both challenges and discoveries, along with precious moments that marked a new beginning. A house that had previously been silent and ominous now felt warm and connected to a family in unexpected ways. Mom, look! I planted the first daisy seeds just like we said, Jenny announced, her small hands dusted with soil as she proudly showed off the freshly prepared flower bed. Samantha's face lit up with joy and gratitude. Only a short time ago she couldn't have pictured her daughter so happy and carefree. You're doing amazing, my little flower. This garden will be the most beautiful we've ever had. Lucas walked over, observing the scene with a smile that even he was surprised to see in his reflection these days. Jenny, you really have a knack for this. Soon, we might need even more space for all the flowers you'll be planting, he said, his tone light, but brimming with a tenderness most hadn't seen before. Do you really think so? Jenny asked, her eyes wide with excitement. Since I was already thinking of planting sunflowers by the gate, I think it's a fantastic idea, Lucas replied with a laugh. It struck him that he hadn't heard himself laugh like this in ages. The sound was both familiar and strangely new. This place had never felt more alive. Every afternoon, Samantha and Jenny would wander through the vast estate, exploring winding paths and hidden spots as if they were meant just for them. One day, they stumbled upon a small lake where ducks drifted along peacefully. Mom, can we come here every day, promise? Jenny asked, clutching her mother's hand. I promise, sweetheart. This is our special place, Samantha replied, her heart full of a peace they had been missing for so long. Soon, Jenny began suggesting ways to improve the place. Mr. Lucas, can we make a tree swing so Mum can push me like in the movies? Her eyes shone with excitement. Lucas shared a look with Samantha, both smiling at Jenny's enthusiasm and innocence. Absolutely, Jenny. I'll even help make it, Lucas said, feeling a genuine excitement to be a part of her happiness. You'll really help. I didn't think a man in a suit could work with tools, Samantha teased, laughing. Well, wait and see. I have a few hidden talents, Lucas joked back, winking as he headed to gather supplies. Building the swing became an all-hands-on-deck project that stretched through the afternoon. Samantha helped Jenny pick the sturdiest branches, while Lucas, with his sleeves rolled up, nailed and tied the ropes carefully. Hang on tight. I'll try it out first, he said with a playful grin. It won't break? Jenny asked, half worried, half laughing. If it does, I'll make an even better one, Lucas promised, easing himself onto the swing and giving it a gentle push. It held steady, and soon Jenny was swinging high as Samantha gently pushed her. It was such a simple moment, yet so perfect, that Lucas felt a warm tug in his heart, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. I never thought I'd see something like this here, he mused, watching them. Later, that night over dinner, Jenny's excitement filled the room as she eagerly shared more ideas for the garden and house. We could paint a mural with flowers and animals on the entrance wall. What do you think? Samantha glanced at Lucas, who nodded in full agreement. his smile reflecting the joy they had all found together. "I think it's a wonderful idea, my little artist. Tomorrow we can start putting all the pieces together," Lucas responded with a smile. "Yes, it'll be the most beautiful mural ever," Jenny replied, her eyes shining with excitement and joy. Samantha reached across the table, resting her hand on Lucas's. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but full of emotion. Lucas looked back at her, feeling a warmth that spread through his chest. "There's no need to thank me. You both brought light back into my life." As days turned into weeks, Lucas's mansion transformed. The walls now echoed with laughter, dreams, and the unfolding story of a family coming together. Samantha looked from her daughter to Lucas, her heart full. This is only the beginning, she thought, feeling deeply content. Months had passed since Samantha and Jenny moved in, and life now held a renewed sense of purpose. Fully recovered, Samantha threw herself into community projects and social causes, working side by side with Lucas and Jenny. The memories of darker times inspired her to help others rediscover hope and fresh starts. She organized fundraisers and support programs for struggling families. Her genuine warmth and passion drew people in, making each event a success. "You have no idea how much of a difference you can make," she'd tell everyone, her smile warm, her resolve firm. Lucas also experienced a powerful change. Partnering with Jenny, he launched a charity aimed at supporting children and families in tough situations. With his resources and influence, he created the New Chance Foundation, providing shelter, education, and meals for hundreds of kids in need. The project expanded quickly, gaining support from friends and colleagues, inspired by his transformation. "Mr. Lucas, 3 new children arrived at the shelter today," a coordinator informed him as he and Jenny toured the facility. "Excellent work," he replied, a sense of pride in his voice. "Let's make sure each one gets everything they need. Jenny, would you like to help pass out the new books?" "Yes, I can't wait to see their smiles," Jenny said, dashing off to gather the books with enthusiasm. She became a little leader in the project, helping out wherever she could, and greeting each new child with a warmth that reflected her own journey. Samantha observed from afar, her heart swelling with pride, as she watched Lucas and Jenny joining forces to make a meaningful impact. Witnessing them work side by side was a powerful reminder that no matter the challenges, something wonderful and transformative can flourish. "This is the family I never expected to have," she thought, brushing away a tear that refused to stay hidden. Her role in New Chance was no small part either. Samantha organized activities, guided the children with advice and care, and always offered a kind word and an encouraging smile. Quickly, New Chance gained a strong reputation across town, drawing in volunteers and supporters. As the project grew, Samantha took on the role of Support Initiatives Coordinator, ensuring that every child felt seen and cared for. "You can achieve anything you set your heart on," she told the kids at a group meeting. "Just believe and work toward it. I'm here to help each of you along the way." Lucas's routine shifted too. He swapped lengthy meetings and business dinners for afternoons spent at shelters and local events. The reputation of his name, once linked solely to wealth and status, began to echo with compassion and generosity. "I never thought I'd see this day," he confided to an old friend during a charity event. "Jenny and Samantha changed my whole perspective," he said, voice thick with emotion. "And because of that, you've changed so many lives," his friend replied, smiling. As the project's influence expanded, the children began sharing their own stories of hope and resilience. Lucas saw it in their eyes, their smiles, and their gratitude. "Mr. Lucas, today I read my first story," a little 6-year-old boy beamed. "I'm proud of you, kiddo," Lucas replied, kneeling down for a hug. On peaceful evenings, the mansion filled with the sound of laughter and warm conversations, as Lucas, Samantha, and Jenny gathered under the stars in their garden. It was where their journey began, and where dreams of the future grew. "Do you think we can do more?" Jenny asked, her eyes full of hope. Lucas looked to Samantha and then to Jenny, feeling the deep connection they had built. "Always, sweetheart, and we'll do it together." Samantha smiled, holding their hands. "Together, there's nothing we can't do." With New Chance's success, Lucas received invitations to speak at conferences, sharing his story of personal growth. He spoke with humility, acknowledging how Samantha and Jenny had taught him the true meaning of life. "It's not wealth that defines a person," he said during one talk. "It's how they make the world a better place." Samantha, too, was invited to share her experiences, inspiring listeners with her resilience and empathy. "My journey proves that even in life's darkest times, there's a light that can guide us," she shared. "Often, that light is in the people we choose to love and support." What was once a mansion symbolizing wealth had transformed into a warm, loving home. Its hallways echoed with the voices of visiting children, joining in reading afternoons and meals Samantha hosted. Jenny often led the tours, sharing with visitors how her life had changed. "You wouldn't believe how it was before," she'd say, smiling. "Now, this place is a true home." And from a distance, the voices of the children sang, promising a brighter tomorrow. Life moved forward with new challenges and victories that only strengthened their family bonds. We hope this story will be a gift that washes away your fatigue and ignites a flame of hope within you. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.